The blood-red sunset painted the distant mountains as Matilda Evans swung the axe with trembling arms, her 22nd unsuccessful attempt that day to split the stubborn oak log. Her hands, once soft from her life back east, were now covered in blisters despite the worn leather gloves she'd purchased in Santa Fe. Sweat dripped down her face, mixing with tears of frustration as she surveyed the half-built cabin walls surrounding her. 3 months in the New Mexico territory, and she was no closer to having a proper roof over her head than when she'd first arrived. The year was 1875, and Fort Stanton's promise of new beginnings had lured Matilda west after the fever took her parents, leaving her with nothing but their modest savings and a desperate need to forge her own path. At 24, she had purchased this plot of land 5 miles outside town, determined to prove that a woman alone could make something of herself in these wild territories. "Miss, you're going to break your arm before you split that log," a deep voice called from behind her. Matilda spun around, nearly losing her balance as she raised the axe defensively. A tall man astride a chestnut stallion regarded her with curious blue eyes beneath the brim of a dusty Stetson. His leather vest was worn at the edges, and the revolver at his hip had clearly seen use, though something in his expression spoke more of kindness than threat. "I didn't ask for your opinion, sir," Matilda replied, lowering the axe slightly but keeping her stance wide. "And you're trespassing on my property." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Lucas Ryder, madam. I've been tracking some strays from the Circle R and saw your construction." He gestured to the uneven walls of her cabin. "Didn't expect to find a lady out here building alone. Well, now you have. Good day, Mr. Ryder." Matilda turned back to her log, determined to ignore him until he left. Lucas stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. "That's pine you're trying to split, not oak. It won't split clean with the grain like that." He pointed to her axe placement. "And your angle's wrong." Matilda gritted her teeth. "I said good day." "You've got maybe 2 hours of daylight left, and from the looks of it, you'll need a place to sleep tonight that isn't under the stars." Lucas gestured to the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Storm's coming." "I can help, or I can leave, but I wouldn't feel right riding away knowing you'll likely be soaked through by midnight." A distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words, and Matilda reluctantly looked at the sky. She'd been so focused on her task that she hadn't noticed the approaching weather. Her canvas tent had barely protected her during the last rainfall, and the thought of another night spent shivering in mud-soaked blankets made her resolve waver. "I don't have money to pay you," she said finally, her pride battling with practicality. Lucas smiled, revealing a slight dimple in his right cheek. "Wasn't asking for any, Miss Evans, Matilda Evans." She hesitated before extending her blistered hand. "Just until the walls are up and a roof is on, then you can return to your cattle. Deal?" Lucas shook her hand gently, then reached for the axe. "First lesson. Let me show you how to split pine properly." As Lucas demonstrated the correct technique, Matilda studied him warily. Fort Stanton had its share of drifters and troublemakers, but something about Lucas Ryder's straightforward manner put her slightly at ease. Still, she kept her father's rifle within reach as they worked until sunset, accomplishing more in those 2 hours than she had in days. When the first fat raindrops began to fall, Lucas helped her secure her tent against the windward side of the partial cabin wall. He declined her offer to share her meager shelter, instead rigging his own canvas between 2 pines nearby. "I'll be back at first light, Miss Evans," he called through the increasing rainfall. "We'll get a proper roof up tomorrow if the weather clears." Matilda lay awake long into the night, listening to the storm rage around her. For the first time since arriving in this untamed land, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps accepting help didn't mean surrendering her independence. True to his word, Lucas returned at dawn, leading a pack horse loaded with tools and supplies. Matilda emerged from her tent, her hair hastily braided, to find him already assessing the cabin structure. "Your foundation's solid," he acknowledged with approval. "Who taught you to build?" "No one," Matilda admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he offered from his own supplies. "I watched the men build the schoolhouse back in Philadelphia and read a book on frontier construction." Lucas's eyebrows rose. "You're building from book learning alone." When she nodded, his expression shifted to one of genuine admiration. "That's impressive, Miss Evans." For the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Lucas would arrive early, work alongside Matilda until dusk, then return to his ranch for the night. He taught her how to properly notch logs, the importance of checking each piece for straightness, and a dozen other skills no book had adequately explained. Matilda learned that Lucas had come west after the war between the states, purchasing land that others had deemed too rocky for cattle. Through persistence and innovative irrigation, he turned the Circle R into a modest but successful operation that employed 3 hands. "Why help me?" Matilda asked one afternoon as they took a brief rest in the shade. "Surely you have responsibilities at your ranch." Lucas considered her question, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "My father always said true wealth is measured by the help you give, not what you keep for yourself." He paused. "Besides, no one should face the frontier alone. It'll break you faster than any bandit or mountain lion." As days passed, Matilda found herself watching Lucas's hands as he worked strong, capable hands that could both gentle a skittish horse and precisely chisel a door hinge. She noticed how he always positioned himself between her and the road whenever strangers passed, his right hand casually near his holster until they were out of sight. For his part, Lucas discovered that Matilda's determination matched her quick intelligence. She never asked him to complete a task she hadn't attempted herself, and by the 3rd day, she was correcting his measurements before he could spot his own errors. "You never mentioned what brought you to Fort Stanton," Lucas said one evening as they sat outside the nearly completed cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Most women don't journey west alone to build cabins in the wilderness." Matilda stared into the small fire between them. "After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Philadelphia. I was a teacher, but the school board made it clear they preferred younger women who hadn't yet developed independent ideas." She smiled ruefully. "One of my father's friends mentioned the territories needed educated people. Said land was cheap and opportunity plentiful." And was he right about the cheap land? Yes, the opportunity. She gestured to her half-built home. "I'm still determining that." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "My mother would have liked you. She had independent ideas too. Taught me to read Shakespeare while my father taught me to track deer." "Is she?" Matilda left the question unfinished. "Gone 10 years now. Fever like your parents." Lucas poked at the fire. "Father followed 3 years later. Horse threw him during a thunderstorm." "I'm sorry," Matilda said softly. "Life out here takes as much as it gives." Lucas looked up at the stars appearing overhead. "But it does give, Miss Evans. It does give." The following day they raised the final wall and began work on the roof. Matilda climbed the ladder without hesitation, passing shingles to Lucas as they worked side by side in the warm autumn sun. "You know, most women I've met would insist on staying firmly on the ground," Lucas remarked as Matilda deftly navigated the roof beams. "I've never seen the sense in fearing heights more than I fear sleeping in the rain," she replied, securing another shingle. "Besides, this is my home. I should know every inch of it." Their hands brushed as she passed him another shingle, and for a moment neither moved away. Matilda felt her cheeks warm, and not from the sun's heat. Lucas cleared his throat and returned to his work, but she caught him glancing at her more frequently as the afternoon progressed. By sunset, the basic roof was complete, with only the finishing touches remaining. Standing back to admire their work, Lucas gave a low whistle of appreciation. "You've got yourself a real home now, Miss Evans, not just a shelter." Matilda gazed at her cabin with a surge of pride so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. What had seemed an impossible dream just weeks ago now stood solid and real before her, the windows catching the last golden light of day. "We did this," she corrected him quietly. "I couldn't have finished alone." "You would have," Lucas said with certainty. "Might have taken longer, but you'd have done it." That night, Matilda insisted Lucas stay for supper, cooking a modest stew with vegetables from her small garden and rabbit he had trapped earlier. They ate inside the cabin for the first time, sitting on upturned crates by the newly installed hearth. "Tomorrow we'll finish the chimney properly," Lucas said, glancing up at the temporary smoke hole they'd fashioned. "Then you won't have to worry about the sudden crack of a rifle shot cut him off." Lucas was on his feet instantly, extinguishing the lantern and pulling Matilda away from the window in one fluid motion. "Stay down," he whispered, drawing his revolver. "Anyone you've had trouble with?" Matilda shook her head, heart pounding. "I've barely spoken to anyone beyond the shopkeepers in town." Another shot rang out, splintering wood near the door. Lucas moved to the window, peering cautiously around the frame. "3 riders," he murmured. "Can't make out who in the dark. Miss Evans." A voice called from outside. "Time to clear out. This land belongs to the Harmon Mining Company now," Matilda gasped. "That's not true. I purchased this land legally from the land office in Santa Fe. I have the deed." Lucas motioned for her to stay quiet. "Harmon's been trying to claim every piece of land with water access for 20 miles. Must have noticed your creek." He checked his ammunition. "Stay here." "You can't go out there," Matilda hissed, grabbing his arm. "There are 3 of them." "And 1 solid door between them and us," Lucas countered. "But if we don't answer, they'll just come back with more men. Harmon has hired guns." Another voice called out. "We're being generous, woman. Walk away now with your life, or there won't be enough left of you to bury." Matilda's eyes flashed with anger. She reached for her father's rifle. "This is my home. I'm not surrendering it to thieves." Lucas studied her determined expression and nodded once. "We'll answer together then, but stay behind the door frame." They positioned themselves carefully on either side of the door. Lucas took a deep breath and called out, "This is private property, legally purchased and registered. Miss Evans has the deed and I've witnessed it myself." "You're trespassing." Laughter met his declaration. "Well now, looks like the lady's found herself a protector." "That you, Ryder? Figured you were smarter than to get between Harmon and what he wants." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Wallace, you tell Harmon if he has a legal claim, he can present it to the territorial court. Until then, I suggest you ride on before this gets ugly." "Already ugly from where I'm standing," Wallace replied. "Last chance." The next shot shattered the newly installed window. Lucas pushed Matilda lower as glass sprayed across the floor. "When I open the door, I need you to fire 2 shots high just to scatter them," Lucas whispered. "I'll handle the rest." Before she could argue, Lucas threw open the door and dove to the side. Matilda fired as instructed, the rifle's kick bruising her shoulder. She heard Lucas's revolver fire twice in rapid succession, followed by cursing and the sound of retreating hoofbeats. Got one of their horses, Lucas said grimly, reloading. They'll be back, but not tonight. Matilda's hands trembled as she lowered the rifle. They can't just claim my land. I have papers, legal rights. Rights mean little without the force to back them, Lucas interrupted, his expression softening at her distress. But you're not alone in this. First thing tomorrow, we'll ride to Fort Stanton and speak with Sheriff Miller. He's no friend of Harmon's. They spent a tense night taking turns watching the approach to the cabin, but the raiders didn't return. At first light, they rode double on Lucas's horse to town, the deed securely tucked inside Matilda's bodice. Sheriff Thomas Miller was a graying man with sharp eyes that missed nothing as Lucas explained the situation. Harmon's been pushing boundaries again, has he? Miller sighed, examining Matilda's deed. This is in order, Miss Evans. Your land is legally yours. Then why would they attack me? Matilda demanded. Because Frederick Harmon thinks money trumps law out here, Miller replied bluntly. He's been buying judges in Santa Fe faster than they can be appointed. So you won't help? Matilda's voice rose in frustration. Miller held up a hand. I didn't say that. I'll ride out there myself today, make it clear you're under the law's protection. He glanced at Lucas. Though seems you've already found yourself a capable defender. Miss Evans defends herself just fine, Lucas responded. But one person alone can't stand watch every night and still work their land. Miller nodded thoughtfully. There's truth in that. Tell you what, I'll send word to the territorial marshal. Harmon's overstepped enough that they might finally take notice. As they left the sheriff's office, Matilda's shoulders slumped. This isn't what I expected when I came west. I thought hard work would be enough. Lucas helped her mount his horse. It is enough most days, but the frontier attracts both the best and worst of men. Some see open land and imagine what they can build. Others see only what they can take. Which were you? Matilda asked quietly. Lucas smiled slightly. Still figuring that out, I suppose. When they returned to the cabin, they found Sheriff Miller already there with 2 deputies, examining the bullet holes in the walls and window. Wallace Tanner's definitely one of Harmon's men, Miller confirmed. Found his hat down by the creek where you winged his horse. I've sent word to the Circle R about what happened. My ranch hands will be on alert, Lucas said with obvious relief. Miller turned to Matilda. Miss Evans, I can spare 1 deputy to stay tonight, but after that. I understand, Matilda said firmly. This is my home and I'll defend it. The sheriff nodded with respect. Just so you know, Harmon's men usually don't risk actual murder. Bad for business. They prefer intimidation. Stand firm, and they often move to easier targets. After the sheriff departed, Lucas helped Matilda repair the broken window with oiled paper, a temporary measure, until glass could be brought from town. As they worked, the easy rhythm they'd established over the past weeks returned, though now punctuated by frequent glances toward the horizon. I can't ask you to stay, Matilda said finally, voicing the concern that had been weighing on her since the attack. Your ranch needs you. Lucas secured the last piece of the makeshift window. I've got good men running things. Miguel's been foreman for 5 years, knows the place better than I do some days. Still nothing, Lucas interrupted gently. We finish what we start, Miss Evans. The cabin needs a proper door. The chimney needs finishing, and that garden of yours needs a fence, unless you want every rabbit for miles helping themselves. Matilda found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Why do you care so much about a stranger's cabin? Lucas was silent for a long moment, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Don't reckon you're much of a stranger anymore, Matilda. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. The deputy assigned by Sheriff Miller stayed vigilantly through the night, but dawn broke without incident. He departed after breakfast with a promise to check back in 2 days' time. True to his word, Lucas remained, working alongside Matilda to complete the essential cabin features that would make it truly livable. By late afternoon, Lucas was teaching Matilda how to properly hang the solid oak door he'd brought from his own storehouse. "The trick is getting the hinges perfectly aligned," he explained, demonstrating with patient hands. "Otherwise, you'll be fighting it every time the weather changes." Matilda watched closely, absorbing his instruction while trying to ignore how aware she'd become of his proximity. Over the past weeks, something had shifted between them, a closeness born of shared work and now shared danger. "Hand me that smaller hammer," Lucas requested, and as Matilda passed it to him, their fingers touched. Neither pulled away immediately, and Lucas's work momentarily stilled. "Mr. Ryder, Lucas," Matilda began hesitantly. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her. Lucas was instantly alert, moving to retrieve his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "Stay inside," he directed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Matilda quickly grabbed her own weapon. "This is my home, Lucas. I won't hide." With a resigned nod, Lucas positioned himself on one side of the door while Matilda took the other. Through the small window, she could see 3 riders approaching, but these weren't Harmon's men. The lead rider was a woman in practical riding clothes, her red hair visible beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Lucas," the woman called. "You out here?" The tension drained from Lucas's body. "It's Sarah, Miguel's wife," he explained to Matilda, opening the door. "Sarah, what brings you this far from the ranch?" Sarah Ortiz dismounted gracefully, her expression serious as she approached. The 2 men with her remained on their horses, scanning the surroundings with experienced eyes. "Trouble," Sarah said without preamble. "Harmon's men cut our north fence last night, drove off about 20 head before Miguel and the boys could stop them." Lucas swore under his breath. "Anyone hurt?" "James took a bullet in the shoulder, but Doc says he'll mend." Sarah's sharp gaze turned to Matilda. "This must be your Miss Evans." "Miguel said you've been helping her build." "Mrs. Ortiz," Matilda acknowledged with a nod, noticing the slight emphasis Sarah had placed on your. "Harmon's pushing harder than usual," Sarah continued. "Word is he's got investors coming from back east. Wants to show them he controls all the water rights in the county." Lucas's expression darkened. "Sheriff know about this latest trouble? Miguel sent Tomás to town right after it happened." Sarah glanced significantly at the cabin. "But Miller's stretched thin, can't be everywhere at once." The implication was clear. Lucas was needed at his own ranch. Matilda felt a complicated mix of guilt and fear. She had no right to keep him from his responsibilities, yet the thought of facing Harmon's men alone terrified her. "I should return with you," Lucas said finally, though his reluctance was evident. "No." Matilda surprised herself with her firmness. "Your ranch needs defending. I'll manage here." Lucas turned to her, conflict clear in his eyes. "Matilda, you've already done more than I had any right to expect," she insisted. "The cabin is built. I have a roof, walls, and a door that locks." She forced a smile. "That's more than I had when I came to Fort Stanton." Sarah watched their exchange with perceptive eyes. "Actually," she interjected, "I brought something that might help both situations." She gestured to one of her companions. "Pedro, explain your idea." The younger of the 2 men dismounted. "Senor Ryder, my cousins arrived from Santa Fe yesterday, 5 good men looking for work. If Miss Evans would permit, 2 could stay here while the others help at the ranch. They're experienced vaqueros and handy with rifles." Hope flickered in Lucas's expression. "Matilda, would you consider it?" Matilda hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I can't pay them much. Room and board would be sufficient for now," Pedro assured her. "Times are hard everywhere. Safe lodging and meals are no small thing." After a moment's consideration, Matilda nodded. "If they're willing, I'd be grateful for the help." The relief on Lucas's face was palpable. "I'll return as soon as I can," he promised. "A few days at most, once we've secured the ranch." As arrangements were made, Matilda found herself watching Lucas the confident way he gave instructions, how the others deferred to his judgment without question. In just weeks, he had become central to her plans, her safety, perhaps even her heart. That evening, after Lucas reluctantly departed with Sarah and one of her companions, Matilda sat with Pedro on the cabin's small porch. His cousins Javier and Tomás would arrive the following morning to help guard the property. "How long have you worked for Mr. Ryder?" Matilda asked, curious about the man who had become so important to her. Pedro smiled. 5 years now. He took me on when no one else would hire a Mexican boy of 16, taught me ranching, paid fair wages." He looked at Matilda knowingly. "The patron is a good man, uncommon good." "Yes," Matilda agreed softly. "I'm beginning to understand that." The next morning, Javier and Tomás arrived as promised. Both were polite but watchful, immediately setting about reinforcing the cabin's defenses. They built a small shelter for themselves nearby, insisting Matilda maintain her privacy while they kept guard. The days without Lucas stretched longer than Matilda had anticipated. She found herself listening for his horse's approach, glancing toward the horizon more frequently than was reasonable. To combat her restlessness, she threw herself into completing the interior of the cabin, building shelves, a proper table, and a chair from the materials Lucas had left. On the 4th day, Tomás returned from town with supplies and news. Harmon had filed a legal claim against both Matilda's property and the Circle R, alleging prior water rights that predated both deeds. "It is a false claim," Tomás assured her, "but it will take time to fight in court." "Time and money," Matilda added grimly, understanding why such tactics were effective. Few homesteaders could afford lengthy legal battles. That night, Matilda could not sleep. The weight of possibly losing everything she had worked for pressed heavily on her chest. Near midnight, she lit a lamp and retrieved her parents' Bible from her trunk. As she opened it, a folded letter fell out, her father's last correspondence with his friend in Santa Fe. Reading it again, a line caught her attention. "The territorial surveyor, James Whitley, has mapped the entire region. Should you decide to come west, he could verify any land claims." Matilda sat up straighter. James Whitley. The territorial surveyor would have records of all previous claims, including any legitimate water rights Harmon might actually possess. At first light, she shared her discovery with Javier and Tomás. "This could help both you and Señor Ryder," Javier agreed. "But Santa Fe is a 5-day journey and dangerous for a woman alone." "I won't be going alone," Matilda said determinedly. "I'll speak with Sheriff Miller about an escort." Before she could implement her plan, however, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. Javier immediately positioned himself on the porch with his rifle, while Tomás directed Matilda inside. "Stay away from the windows," he warned, checking his own weapon. Matilda's heart raced as she peered carefully around the edge of the curtain. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Lucas at the head of the group. "It's Mr. Ryder," she called to Tomás, already moving toward the door. She stepped onto the porch just as Lucas dismounted. The sight of him dusty, unshaven, but whole filled her with such joy that she had to resist the urge to run to him. "Matilda," he greeted her, his voice warm despite his evident exhaustion. "Everything all right here?" "We've had no trouble," she assured him, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. "But you look like you haven't slept in days." Lucas grimaced. "Not much. Harmon's men have been testing our defenses every night." He gestured to the 3 men who accompanied him. "We're rotating shifts to keep the ranch secure." As they moved inside the cabin, Matilda explained her discovery about the territorial surveyor. Lucas listened intently, his expression brightening with each detail. "This could be exactly what we need," he agreed when she finished. "Harmon's entire claim rests on supposed prior rights that no one has been able to verify." "I was planning to travel to Santa Fe." "No," Lucas interrupted firmly. "It's too dangerous right now. Harmon has men watching the roads." "Then what do you suggest?" Matilda challenged, her independence reasserting itself. "Wait until he legally steals our land." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "Not wait, no, but we need to be smart about this." He thought for a moment. "James Whitley and I have crossed paths before. If I write to him explaining our situation, he might send copies of the relevant surveys." "That could take weeks," Matilda protested. "A telegraph would be faster," one of Lucas's men suggested. "Send it from Fort Stanton today. Could have an answer within days." The idea had merit, and after discussion, they agreed Lucas would ride to town immediately to send the message. Before he left, however, he pulled Matilda aside. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "Harmon approached me yesterday with an offer to buy the Circle R, said he'd drop all claims if I sold to him." Matilda's stomach tightened. And I refused," Lucas said simply. "But it tells me he's getting desperate." "The investor rumors are true. He needs to show control of the watershed before they arrive next month." "Which makes him more dangerous," Matilda concluded. Lucas nodded grimly. "We need to be prepared for anything. I've brought extra ammunition and supplies. The men will construct a defensive perimeter while I'm gone." As Lucas prepared to depart for town, Matilda found herself struggling with emotions she hadn't expected. The danger to her property now seemed secondary to the risk Lucas was taking on her behalf. "Be careful," she said as he mounted his horse. "Harmon would solve many problems if something happened to you on the road." Lucas's expression softened. "Worried about me, Miss Evans?" "Someone has to be, since you clearly aren't," she replied, trying for lightness but failing to hide her concern. Lucas leaned down from his saddle, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've got powerful incentive to return safely, Matilda. More than you might guess." Before she could respond, he straightened and signaled to his men, then rode out at a careful pace, scanning the terrain as he went. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity as the ranch hands constructed a low barricade around the cabin's perimeter. Matilda worked alongside them, filling sandbags and positioning them at strategic points. By evening, they had created a defensible position that would offer protection from rifle fire. Satisfied with their work, the men established a watch rotation while Matilda prepared a hearty stew from her garden vegetables and preserved meat. Night fell without Lucas's return, and Matilda found sleep elusive. Every sound had her reaching for her rifle. Every shift in the shadows outside her window caused her heart to race. When dawn finally broke, she was already dressed and waiting anxiously for any sign of his approach. Mid-morning brought not Lucas but another rider, Sheriff Miller, looking grim as he dismounted before the cabin. "Miss Evans," he greeted her formally, "I've news you need to hear." Matilda's throat constricted with fear. "Is it Lucas? Has something happened?" Miller's expression confirmed her worst fears before he spoke. "Ryder was ambushed on his way back from town yesterday. Found him this morning in a ravine about 2 miles east. The world seemed to tilt beneath Matilda's feet. "Is he?" "He's alive," Miller said quickly, seeing her distress. "But badly hurt. Took a bullet to the shoulder and another grazed his head. He's at Doc Wilson's in town." Relief mingled with renewed fear. "I need to go to him." Miller shook his head. "That's exactly what Harmon wants, draw you out away from your property. The moment you leave, his men will move in and claim you abandoned it." "But Lucas is receiving the best care available," Miller assured her. "Doc Wilson says he'll recover given time. Right now, the best thing you can do is hold your ground here." Matilda's mind raced, torn between her need to see Lucas and the reality of her situation. "Did he manage to send the telegram to Santa Fe?" "He did," Miller confirmed. "And there's more. Before he was attacked, Lucas filed a formal complaint against Harmon with my office. With his testimony and the evidence we've gathered from other landowners, I've finally got enough to request federal intervention." Hope flickered in Matilda's chest. "So you're saying we need to hold out a little longer?" "A week, maybe two," Miller nodded. "I've sent for a federal marshal. Once he arrives, things will change quickly." After the sheriff departed, promising to send regular updates on Lucas's condition, Matilda gathered Javier, Tomás, and Pedro to share the news and strengthen their resolve. "We will not yield," she told them firmly, surprising herself with her own determination. "This land is legally mine, and Lucas is fighting for his. We owe it to him to stand our ground." The men nodded in solemn agreement, their loyalty to Lucas evident in their expressions. They reinforced the defenses further, prepared additional ammunition, and established clearer communication signals between their positions. 3 days passed with no further incidents, though the tension remained palpable. Each evening, a rider from town brought news of Lucas's condition. Fever on the first night, improved but weak the second, sitting up and demanding to leave by the third. On the fourth day, a messenger arrived from Santa Fe not with a telegram but with sealed documents and a letter from James Whitley himself. The territorial surveyor had responded to Lucas's urgent request with remarkable speed, sending original maps that clearly showed the watershed boundaries and legal claims. "These prove Harmon has no prior water rights," Matilda confirmed after studying the documents. "His entire case is fraudulent." Pedro examined the maps with a practiced eye. "Not just fraudulent criminal. Look here." He pointed to several boundary markers. "These have been deliberately altered on the copies filed in Fort Stanton. That is forgery of government documents." The evidence was damning, but Matilda knew Harmon wouldn't surrender easily, especially with his investors expected soon. She dispatched Pedro to town immediately with the documents for Sheriff Miller, keeping copies hidden in the cabin. That night, the attack they had been anticipating finally came. Just after midnight, shots rang out from the darkness, striking the sandbags and cabin walls. Matilda and her defenders returned fire carefully, conserving ammunition while keeping the attackers at bay. "They're trying to scare us into running," Javier observed as they took cover behind the barricade. "If they wanted us dead, they would have tried to burn us out." Matilda nodded grimly. "Harmon still wants to appear legitimate to his investors. Driving off squatters is one thing, mass murder is another." The firefight continued sporadically until dawn when the attackers finally withdrew. No one had been seriously injured, though a bullet had grazed Tomás's arm, requiring bandaging. Exhausted but resolute, Matilda was helping to reinforce damaged sections of their defenses when the sound of multiple horses approaching drew everyone's attention. She raised her rifle, expecting Harmon's men to return in greater numbers. Instead, the approaching party flew the territorial flag, with Sheriff Miller at its head. Beside him rode a distinguished man in a formal coat despite the heat, and behind them came at least a dozen armed deputies. But it was the figure on the third horse that captured Matilda's complete attention. Lucas, pale and clearly in pain, but upright in the saddle, determination etched in every line of his face. "Lucas," she breathed, lowering her weapon and moving toward him as the group reached the cabin. He dismounted carefully, favoring his injured shoulder, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then, heedless of the audience, Matilda closed the distance between them and embraced him gently, mindful of his wounds. "You shouldn't be riding," she scolded softly, even as her hands confirmed for herself that he was truly there, alive. "Couldn't let you have all the excitement," he replied, his voice rough but his eyes warm as they met hers. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat, drawing their attention to the official proceedings at hand. "Miss Evans, this is Judge Howard from the Territorial Court. He's issued injunctions against Harmon based on the evidence you and Ryder provided." Judge Howard stepped forward, his bearing authoritative. "Mr. Harmon has been arrested on charges of fraud, forgery of government documents, and conspiracy to commit armed intimidation. His assets are frozen pending investigation." Matilda could scarcely believe what she was hearing. "So it's over. Just like that." "Hardly just like that," the judge corrected with a slight smile. "Mr. Ryder's complaint, coupled with the surveyor's documents and testimony from multiple landowners, presents an overwhelming case. We've been building evidence against Harmon for some time, but needed the final pieces you provided." As the judge explained the legal proceedings that would follow, Lucas remained at Matilda's side, his hand finding hers when the officials were distracted by inspecting the property boundaries. "I was afraid I'd lost you," she admitted quietly. Lucas's fingers tightened around hers. "Takes more than Harmon's hired guns to keep me away." He glanced at the cabin, pride evident in his expression. "You did it, Matilda. You held your ground." "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With Harmon in custody and his operation dismantled, the atmosphere throughout the county lightened perceptibly. Landowners who had been intimidated into silence came forward with their own testimonies, strengthening the case against him. Lucas divided his time between the Circle R, where repairs to damaged fencing continued, and Matilda's cabin, where he insisted on completing the final touches despite his healing wounds. His ranch hands, relieved of constant vigilance, eagerly assisted in both locations. "You know," Lucas remarked one evening as they sat on the finished porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, "this is a mighty fine piece of land you've got here. Good water, fertile soil." "It is," Matilda agreed, contentment warming her voice. "Better than I dared hope when I purchased it." Lucas seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Been thinking about my own place. The Circle R is good cattle land, but it lacks something." "What's that?" Matilda asked, curious about his thoughtful tone. "A proper home," Lucas said simply. "The ranch house is functional, but it's never been much more than a place to sleep between work days." Matilda's heart quickened at the direction of his words. "Some might say that's all a home needs to be." "Not me," Lucas replied, turning to face her fully. "A home needs more. It needs care, attention to detail, someone who sees possibilities beyond just shelter." His gaze held her steadily. "Someone like you, Matilda." The implication hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Matilda found herself unable to look away from his earnest expression. "Lucas," she began hesitantly. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that I've come to care for you," he interrupted gently. "More than I expected, and certainly more than is proper to admit after such a short acquaintance." He smiled ruefully. But the frontier has its own rules about what's proper, doesn't it? Matilda felt a smile tugging at her lips. It does seem to. Lucas took her hand, his touch careful but sure. I'm not asking for promises right now. Just permission to call on you properly, to see if what I feel, what I hope you might feel too, could grow into something lasting. The honesty in his voice touched Matilda deeply. This was not a man given to idle words or fleeting emotions. Whatever he felt genuinely. I would like that very much, she answered softly. Over the following months, as winter settled over the New Mexico territory, Lucas courted Matilda with the same patient dedication he had shown in helping build her cabin. He brought books from his own library, knowing her love of reading. They shared meals, stories, and gradually, dreams of what might be. The cabin continued to evolve under their combined efforts. Lucas built additional furniture, a rocking chair, a proper bedstead, shelves for Matilda's growing collection of books and botanical specimens. She created curtains from fabric purchased in town, planted hardy winter herbs in pots near the windows, and began planning an expanded garden for spring. By Christmas, Lucas had become a daily presence at the cabin, arriving each morning and departing reluctantly each evening. The people of Fort Stanton, initially curious about the independent Eastern woman and the respected rancher, now simply accepted them as a pair. On Christmas Eve, a light snow dusted the landscape as Lucas arrived carrying a small pine tree he had cut from his own land. Together, they decorated it with paper stars Matilda had crafted and candles carefully placed on the sturdy branches. After a simple but special dinner, they sat before the fireplace, the cabin warm and fragrant with pine. Lucas seemed unusually contemplative, staring into the flames as if gathering his thoughts. I have something for you, he said finally, reaching into his vest pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. Made this myself, though it took 3 attempts to get it right. Matilda accepted the box, admiring the craftsmanship before carefully opening the hinged lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, Lucas explained, his voice suddenly rough with emotion. She told me once to save it for a woman strong enough to build something lasting, not just someone who needed protecting. Matilda looked up at him, her vision blurring with unexpected tears. Matilda Evans, Lucas said formally, taking her hand in his. When I first found you swinging that axe, I thought I was helping a woman who needed assistance. I was wrong. You didn't need me, you could have built this cabin alone, given time. But I've come to believe that sometimes the strongest foundations are built by 2 people working together. He took a deep breath. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Matilda felt a certainty she had never known before. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, Lucas Ryder, I will. They were married on a bright spring morning in 1876, with the apple trees Matilda had planted beginning to blossom around the cabin. Sheriff Miller, now a trusted friend, performed the ceremony on the porch Lucas had built, with the entire community of Fort Stanton and the Circle R hands in attendance. After the celebration, when the guests had departed and twilight softened the landscape, Lucas carried Matilda across the threshold of their cabin, for they had decided to make it their primary home, with the Circle R ranch house serving as a secondary residence during busy seasons. Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder, Lucas murmured as he set her gently on her feet. Our home, Matilda corrected, looking around at the space they had created together. Every beam, every plank, every carefully crafted detail represented their shared effort and vision. Do you remember what you said when we first met? Lucas asked, drawing her into his arms. That you didn't ask for my opinion about your log-splitting technique, Matilda laughed softly. I was rather stubborn. Still are, Lucas teased, brushing a kiss against her forehead. But I admire that about you. You know what you want and you work for it, no matter the obstacles. What I want now, Matilda said, meeting his gaze with newfound confidence, is a life built with you. Not just this cabin, but everything that comes after, the challenges, the joys, all of it. Then that's what we'll build, Lucas promised. Day by day, year by year. In the years that followed, the cabin expanded as their family grew. Lucas added rooms as needed, first a proper kitchen with a pump that brought water directly from the well. Then a nursery when their son James was born in 1877, followed by a second bedroom when their daughter Elizabeth arrived 2 years later. The Circle R prospered under their joint management, with Matilda applying her organizational skills to the ranch's accounts and operations, while Lucas handled the practical aspects of cattle raising. They hired a foreman who lived at the ranch house, allowing them to maintain their beloved cabin as their primary residence. 10 years after Lucas had first found Matilda struggling with her axe, they stood together on the porch of their now substantial home, watching their children play in the orchard that had grown from Matilda's first tentative plantings. James, at 9, showed his father's aptitude for working with animals, while 7-year-old Elizabeth had inherited her mother's determination and love of books. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lucas asked, his arm around Matilda's waist as they observed their thriving homestead. "When you first came west," Matilda leaned into his embrace, considering the question. "I imagined independence," she admitted. "I imagined proving that a woman could succeed alone in the territories." She smiled up at him. "What I never imagined was finding someone who would value that independence rather than try to diminish it." Lucas kissed her temple gently. "Some treasures are too precious to change. Your spirit is one of them." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, reminiscing about that first difficult summer and the challenges they had overcome together. The cabin stood as testament to their shared journey. Every nail, every board, every stone in the chimney representing not just shelter, but the home they had built with their own hands and filled with love. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth Lucas had constructed, lamplight glowed through windows Matilda had curtained, and the sounds of their children's laughter echoed through rooms that had grown beyond either of their original visions. What had begun as one woman's determination to build a simple cabin alone had become something far more enduring, a legacy of love, strength, and partnership that would stand for generations to come.